So as you can see, this is a painting that says love in the background. You can sort of see it if you distance a little bit. And I know that the Beatles sang that all you need is love, and maybe they were being literal, maybe they weren't. But is that all you need? Is all you need love? Well, in the piece we're going to read and talk about today by William James, What Makes a Life Significant, James takes up the larger question of whether or not one thing can possibly satisfy us for a significant life. So that's what we're going to talk about today. James's piece was written in 1898, and it came from a couple of talks that he gave at Bryn Mawr and Stanford colleges. And James was very good at tailoring his talks for his audiences. And here he's addressing people just like you, people who are concerned about what they're becoming and what they want to become. And so to get into the spirit of this piece, I want you to think for a second, what would you put in an obituary for yourself? I know that sounds kind of dark, but think about it. What accomplishments would you want there to be in there? What personal qualities would you want people to mention? Uh, James really thought that in order to think about what makes for a significant life, we need to think about things from both an internal perspective, right, from how we think of ourselves, and also from an external perspective, how other people see us. So this exercise about the obituary is interesting because when people compose their own obituaries, one thing that comes out very frequently is that how someone lives their life is often just as important, if not more, than what they even choose to do with it, right? So how we live, by what codes, by what values, with what feelings, right? These can be as important for us as the career that we chose, as long as that career doesn't conflict with our values. So James is making the case that significance in life is going to be the outcome of one main principle and three combined factors. So what we want to do in this lecture is talk about what they are. So the principle that James seizes upon is this one. Respect other people's ways of being happy as long as those ways don't interfere with our own. This is a principle of tolerance. Now, note, this can be very difficult to practice because when someone makes himself happy in what we think of as a ridiculous way, we often feel tempted to criticize them, right? And often the criticism might not be to their face. It could come as some sort of subtle form of social criticism like gossip or exclusion. But it's very hard sometimes to tolerate all of the different ways people make themselves happy. And James here in this essay is asking for more than just polite tolerance. He's asking for the kind of tolerance that insists that we remember that each person has their own internal music, which is real and powerful to them, and really which must be respected. So James is also concerned, though, besides this one principle, with three factors. And the three factors are head, heart, and soul. The head, he means intelligence, education, right? Our intellectual development, not necessarily formal education, but right, development of critical and questioning imaginative abilities. The heart and guts is the action, the will, right? Our pluck, our ability to make things happen, what's sometimes called the active virtues. And the third part, which we could call soul, really, or ideals, our ability to aspire. This is the ability that is, James relates to ideals. So our ability to form novel and conscious ideals for ourselves, imaginative intelligence as a director and a contributor to our ways of assessing things in life. So these are the three factors and the one principle. And remember, all of these can be seen either from an internal perspective or an external perspective. From the internal perspective, we're concerned with oneself. We're like, who am I? What am I doing? That kind of thing. From the external view, it's, well, what do other people think of me? Did they recognize what I accomplished? Are they angry with what I've done? Right? So we have both of these things, which are factors. I care about my own opinion of myself, but I also care about what other people think of me. Especially if they're people that I respect and who, I admire. So each of these three factors, intelligence, action, and ideals, they're not they're not enough by themselves. They have to all be present. They have to be interacting to make a significant life. But there's no single recipe for these how these three things should be expressed or how they should interact, right? James says that each person has to find their own solution to the tension that exists between these internal and external perspectives. What makes us happy as individuals on the one hand, and what earns the respect of others. So let's look at the first factor, the factor of the head, intelligence or education. To discuss this factor, James describes a trip he takes to a community called Chautauqua. And this is near the Chautauqua Lake, and it's an intellectual community. You might think of it as like a camp for creative intellectual people, right? This is a place where you have beautiful grounds, all the basic needs of life are cared for. There's music, there's sports, there's good company, there's delicious food, there's no disease, there's no poverty, there's no crime, there are no police, right? It's just a very idyllic setting. And James goes up there and sees what's going on, and he wonders, I wonder if this is all that's necessary for a significant life. Maybe everything for a significant life is located right here at Chautauqua. He thinks about this for a while, and in the essay he comes to the conclusion, no, there's something lacking here. What is it that's lacking for James? Do you remember? What is it that's not there? Well, he says there's no danger. There's no chance, right? There's no struggle. He says these things give our lives character. We need struggle, right? Without struggle, there can't be triumph. We need effort. We need danger. These were things that Schopenhauer pointed out. The upshot of this recognition that James has about Chautauqua Lake is that there's something incomplete in the usual standard we have for paradise. That there's something that would make our life significant that's missing from that picture. Now, how this translates for you, I don't know. I've heard some people say, yeah, I know a lot of people describe that the perfect life is like living in the suburbs or maybe even in an island, a beautiful island, or off the grid, where I'm not really bothered or have to deal with the problems of other people, right? I'm just sort of self-sufficient. So there are lots of different fantasies. Some people, it's lots of people around. Some people, it's off by themselves, could be, right? So there are a lot of different ways of thinking about it. But what James says is that without the struggle, right, without ideals, right, this intellectual factor by itself is not enough. The second factor he discusses is action or will. Let's consider it. So in Chautauqua, James says, I was looking for a certain kind of drama, a certain kind of heroism, and I found that it wasn't there. It almost seemed like it was sickly perfect, right? The Chautauqua community, when thought about from that perspective, right? And he says, I had a revelation. He talks about as he was going along, he has this revelation of who the real heroes are. Who are the real heroes that James has forgotten about? Do you remember? Well, he thinks about the poor, the working classes, the people who survive day in and day out, right, despite tremendous forces working against them. And he sees a nobility and a dignity in the work they do, in their ability to survive, to push through grueling conditions and situations. They keep the buildings clean, they keep our streets paved and functioning, they keep society functioning, right? These are the essential workers, you might say. All the while they do this, they make less money, they have inferior health care, if they have any at all. There was no health care in James's day. They are often looked down upon by the professional classes, by the wealthy, right? They're more harassed by the police. They find it nearly impossible to get good credit from banks. They have to suffer whatever education is made affordable to them, right? So there's a kind of, it's almost a fantasy, although it's sort of a romantic idea of the people who have this second factor, the struggling, right? And Tolstoy talked about these folks too. And he really romanticized them. For Tolstoy, these were the sorts of people in whom you could see God. There was a kind of divinity in the poor. And most of society doesn't realize this. So James considers this second factor. He thinks about what constitutes it, and he thinks about whether or not it's sufficient. And James is, though he's tempted, he's suspicious of the extreme romanticism that's in Tolstoy's account. He appreciates, on the one hand, that Tolstoy praises a class of people that are normally underappreciated, that are mistreated, that are even despised. But what bothers James is that there's too much of the sort of subjective internal perspective baked into this view, right? The poor, the working class are being painted with a very broad and sentimental brush. James says, look, there's the internal side to things. There's a feeling of struggle and overcoming, and yeah, that's great. But life is actually hard for these people. From the external perspective, they need money, they need health care, they need medicine, they need education for their kids. And so it's very hard to consider this as being a sufficient factor in a significant life, because it doesn't matter how noble you are as you struggle in poverty, you actually need money to live a significant life. You don't have to be wealthy, but you can't just be desperate all the time.